So we wanted to talk a little bit about change management and about digital transformation and technology and kind of how this all works. And one of the things we were sort of talking about was, the CEO never calls up and says, "Oh my God, we need a new CMS. Like, you guys need to make that happen." That's not what happens, right? CEOs sit around and worry about, how are we doing on the market? What's the sort of, what are the sort of economic, fundamentals that we need to be addressing? What's the quality of our customer experience? What are the challenges we're facing in our business? Are we losing market share to a competitor? Those kinds of things. And particularly at this point in time where there's this big sort of, you feel some tension in the global economic marketplace. If you've got 10 or 20 or 30 million customers or, a large constituency you have to manage, you've got to worry about making sure that those people get taken care of and they're getting a great experience. And so that's what the CEO talks about, right? And then what happens is somewhere in the organization, somebody says, "Oh, we should buy some software because software solves everybody's problems." And so you think that you've got this sort of clear path between the direction that the company needs to head and the piece of technology that gets chosen. But as we found, it hasn't always worked out that way. And so I was going to ask Rob a little bit about his experience around sort of how was the decision to sort of make a CMS? How did this all kind of come together for you guys?
So our decision actually all predates my involvement in this role. So I actually was asked to step into this role June of last year. The decision had already been made to buy a CMS, and it had nothing to do with managing content, and it had nothing to do with kind of transformation of our content management system. It really had to do with the fact that, like a lot of different professions, we are a profession that is in the midst of a huge digital disruption, right? So historically, the way you measured your progress in terms of growing through a firm like Deloitte is, as you would get promoted, you would get a different color pencil to do your check marks, right? I mean, that's like literally, if you go back to the accounting world, that's where we started. But we realized that the days of statistical sampling are being replaced by the days of access to complete data sets from clients and rapidly figuring out the outliers and stuff like that. And so we needed to build an audit platform that would allow us to really transform the way we execute our audits. So we made that decision. We started to commit hundreds of millions of dollars to that. And about a year into that journey, someone said, I'm not sure that your 15-year-old content management system is really going to be able to deliver what your audit transformation platform needs in order for you to be able to do what you want to do in a cloud-based environment. And so all of a sudden, my leadership team, which all predates me, got pulled into this whole vendor selection requirements gathering process. And so we actually committed to replacing our content management system about a year and a half into our whole transformation journey of our audit platform. Then I was asked to step into the role. And at that point, I just kind of looked at it, and my team already had laid out most of this. But I said, God, if the only thing we get out of this is a content management system that integrates with a new audit platform, we have squandered this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Because it's only with the new system that comes into play that you really have the opportunity to take a step back, look at all your processes, and really just transform what you're doing. And so that kind of started our journey.
That's great. I thought I'm going to go off script a little bit, which is the first time Rob and I met, I guess a little over a year ago, and we were talking about SDL, and we were talking about implementation and some of the challenges, technical, and some of the opportunities and things that you could do. But the conversation that we had was really around, it's a digital transformation problem, it's a cultural problem, it's a changing the way people work problem, it's a leveraging the technology to advance a bunch of problems that you didn't even realize that you had, but the technology is sort of well developed for that. And I think part of what, and I'd be curious to get your reflection on our conversation, but part of, so if Rob and I met, happy hour had already started. I was a little bit like, I want to meet this guy, and I really want to go to happy hour, but I'm going to stay and talk to Rob for a while. So anyways, that's why we're sponsoring happy hour afterwards, after the sessions tomorrow. But we spent a couple hours talking about digital transformation, what it takes to move an organization. And if people knew what it was that they needed, they'd just go out and buy it, except that transforming your organization means that you've got to bring everybody along, and you've got to get them to a point that they understand sort of what's coming next and feel good and excited about that. And I think part of the journey for us last year is the way in which we've gotten everybody excited and involved across the organization. So,
yeah, and while my title might be Chief Knowledge Officer, I think I'm really kind of therapist in chief. Yeah, exactly. Because really what I'm doing is working with a bunch of different leaders across the firm who all have thoughts on what this is,
Right.
and really helping to kind of align them and really get them to see what the potential is, and trying to speak their language. And Brad talked about this. It was supposed to be a half-hour meeting here at SDL Connect last year. It turned into about an hour and a half. We tend not to have a shortage of words between us, so we will end on time today, I do promise. But we really actually started to then talk about this much bigger problem set than just a technology project.
Exactly.
And by no means am I trying to minimize the effort involved in a technology project. But again, from my perspective, this was all about transformation, really changing our practices. And the reality is when we do that, it's uncomfortable for people, right? Because I'm totally disrupting or potentially disrupting the way people have done their job forever. But I really have this firm belief that we're going to land on the other side in a much better place. And that's actually what I really enjoy about the role.
Let's hit the next slide so I can remember what to say next. Oh yeah, we faced a perfect storm. So I think this is part of what we were talking about, which really I think, and Rob had the vision to see this, which they'd purchased the SDL platform, they're engaged in this process of sort of redefining the audit process, and then we started talking about knowledge management and transferring knowledge, and I'll let Rob sort of talk about this, but Deloitte's a knowledge-based organization. They essentially have a bunch of really brilliant people who use that knowledge, enhance that knowledge, enrich that knowledge, and share that with one another. And so I think the opportunity was really how do we leverage SDL as a platform to then sort of drive this enrichment process, this enhancement process. And so really I think for you, like last year was this opportunity to kind of bring this all together and paint a much bigger picture rather than just implementing a CMS, but just talk about, hey, what are we going to do to the organization?
And I think if I go on to the next slide to make sure I'm, So we had this opportunity to paint this great picture, and I'm going to actually go forward a slide. I'm going to go off to script again.
Yeah.
So we had this really important meeting within our firm. James Baxter, who's on my team, he and I were at this meeting in December of last year. This was before we actively had Tazoo engaged, and we were talking about reuse of content, and we were talking about machine translation, and we were talking about all these things that made us so excited on our team to this group of stakeholders, and it went over like a lead balloon. They had no idea what the hell we were talking about. They had no idea why we were excited about what we were excited about. And I remember leaving that, it was like right before the holidays in December, leaving that going, God, I got to work on my messaging. This is not going over well. And so we actually thought, well, we're a firm of accountants. We think of everything numerically, right? How can we take what we're talking about and how can we translate this into something that actually makes sense for our stakeholders? And by stakeholders, I mean the people who are writing the checks, the people who are going to be stuck doing a lot of the work in terms of reorging our content or transforming our content. And so we kind of really distilled it down, and this was really thanks to Tazoo's help to help us frame it this way, into above the line and below the line, right? So from a below the line perspective, what we got people who were really worried about cost control excited about is we could speed the time to market to getting content out the door, do more with the same number of resources, translate into the language of the professional doing the work to speed up their ability to do their job. A stat, it takes us within the US, when we publish something, it takes us 15 hours a page to publish something. 10 hours of that is subject matter expert time trying to actually get the thoughts down in a way that's clear and cohesive. 5 hours of that are editors and content analysts and desktop publishers trying to get it out the door. If you think about what our bill rates are, that's an incredibly expensive page, right? So where on the below the line perspective, what I was getting people excited about is, look, if I could cut that time from 10 hours to 6 hours of subject matter expert time, I could redeploy those subject matter experts into revenue generating activities. If I can get my 5 hours of the folks, the unsung heroes of this whole thing, the folks who get the content out the door, if I could get that from 5 hours to 3 hours, I can get 40% more throughput with the same number of people, right? So I started to talk their language in that regard. And then I have the other side of the firm who's all interested in growth and revenue and everything else. And for those folks, I said, look, if we could get content out the door that actually is easy for people to find, if we can get content out the door that's more timely, think about what that does from an eminence standpoint. Think about what that does in terms of keeping us top of mind to the people who are out buying services so that ultimately it can contribute to revenue growth. It can contribute to, selling more to the same clients. So we started to really dissect the message into something that would resonate with folks, which then all of a sudden actually got people excited about what we were trying to do. And so James and I actually went back down and spoke to the same group in February. And it was literally as if we were talking to an entirely different audience, right? All of a sudden it resonated with them. And then all of a sudden we got the momentum behind us that we needed for, what effectively will be a 5-year journey.
Yeah. Rob makes a really good point, which we wanted to make sure we got across to you guys today. So we're at this conference, we're talking about content. It's abstract. It's really hard for people to get their brains wrapped around just the entire supply chain of content, because you have a job inside a company or an organization, and you're responsible for a sliver of that. So you've got, we come here, we get super excited about the technology, we geek out on DITA and XML schemas and all this kind of stuff, but you have to actually go back to your organization and get them excited about doing all this stuff. So you need to find a methodology, a way of communicating. And so for Deloitte, the sort of above the line, below the line was a great way to sort of get everybody invested. But there's something different for every organization. That probably won't work for every single organization out there. And part of your job, if you want to lead one of these efforts inside your company, is to sort of think, what's the paradigm? How do I give people something that they can anchor on so that they'll take the time to listen to you to actually understand what you're talking about? So that when you say, hey, I really want to talk to you about improving the quality of how we do content editing and authoring and how we could use DITA and Tridian and all these other products to change our business, their minds are open because they see the value. So if you're a below the line person, you're like, oh yeah, we got to do this, because how many people in Deloitte auditing?
So we have 80,000 audit professionals around the globe who ultimately will be impacted by what we're doing.
So do the quick math. Let's say everybody saves 2 hours a week.
Actually, I've done this math.
Okay, you've done this math. I was being nice. I didn't know what I could actually say or not say. Yes.
So if we save 80,000 professionals 5 minutes a day, just 5 minutes a day times 200 work days a year, because we have holidays and PTO and all that fun stuff, it actually translates to 1.367 million hours a year. My suspicion is we will save a lot more than 5 minutes a day. So you do the math on that, and all of a sudden people get really excited about what the opportunity is.
That's awesome. And I'm glad you said it, not me, because I'm not going to get in trouble. But the point about all this is that you have to put it in people's language so they understand, they get excited about it. And when Rob says that and talks to the firm, and that's why the meeting in February is probably so different, because everybody's like, oh, wait a minute, you're talking about how we can save a ton of money? Now remember, that's only half your audience, because I would say there's two kinds of people in the world. There's people who want to solve a problem, and people want to achieve an objective. So you've got the below the line people and the above the line people. So there are people who want to grow the business and make it get bigger and stronger and faster, and then you got people who want to save money, who are worried about operational efficiency and those things. And so you just have to sort of think through your organization. What's the currency? What's the social currency? What's the social capital? What's the way that your company sort of talks and articulates their internal messaging that can be framed? In this case was a really good example, but there's something unique for all of you. So if you get anything out of this presentation, go back to your companies and think, like, how should we frame this differently? Because I want to get people excited about the outcomes, but I need to get them excited about the outcomes first before I start explaining to them all the cool technology that's coming their way. If that makes sense.
And what I would just say, so who here is somehow involved in their organization's budgeting process? Okay. Is it an easy process for you? Okay. So we're a firm of accountants. We start our fiscal year June 1st. We start our budgeting for next year in September, and it goes until May, right? Because, accountants can really... So... But by January, our budget is locked and loaded for the next year. And what was really interesting here was in May, our senior leaders kind of had this aha moment and said, you know what, Rob, your platform is actually at the center of everything we're trying to do. Do you have enough money in your budget for next year to achieve what you need to achieve? So in May, all of a sudden, right, and we're May, we're starting the next fiscal year a week down the road. All of a sudden the pocketbooks opened up in a way that they hadn't been opened up in a while, which was huge, right? That was a huge, but it was all because of the messaging that we were able to get people behind what we were trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I think our next slide is our Star Trek slide. Oh, the pen is mightier than the sword. Well, we had put this slide together really just to talk about the idea that, content is it's probably the single most important intangible asset in your organization. It's the crucible of every single customer interaction. It's the single sort of point of success or failure inside from an internal perspective, from an external perspective. And most organizations don't actually really understand how content gets produced and how the sort of complete flow. And I think one of the things that we enjoyed in terms of working with Deloitte is sort of, and Rob remembers this, but we put together kind of like a representation of the New York train system. And then that was really a representation of the flows of content inside of Deloitte. And being able to kind of visualize that and get people involved and have them sort of understand, like, wait a minute, content production in the organization is a really, is a way in which we work together, but it's not often described. It's described as a set of systems, or it's described as an output that somebody needs to deliver, but it's actually an entire ecosystem that needs to be observed and understood and kind of mapped out. And so I think, again, as you go back to sort of part of our presentation today is sort of illuminate some of the things that you need to share internally to get people invested. So people need that aha moment. You can't just talk to them about content. You can't just talk to them about reusability. And you've got a good story on reusability, right, in terms of the timeline for how quickly you guys were, when it was in the May meeting when you showed them how quickly you were able to get a unit of content.
Yeah, so actually I could give a very real example, but I want to go back and pick on one thing Brad said before. One of the other things in terms of messaging within our firm is we're a professional services firm, right? So our core business really revolves around taking knowledge out of the heads of the few and getting it into the hands of the many. So we have a lot of very senior people in our firm that spent 25 years becoming the master of this topic. How do we ultimately get the knowledge out of their head and into the hands of the 5-year person, the 10-year person that's out serving clients directly to enable them to really deliver to our clients what our clients are expecting? Yeah. So that was another way that we kind of framed our message. And then when you go to kind of reuse of content, or even just not even so much reuse of content, but just the efficiency of the platform, and this is very real. So we just launched our next generation audit application 3 weeks ago. There is a certain type of content that's very complex to manage. So right now we have legacy content management systems still running, feeding legacy audit applications, and new content management system built on SDL feeding new audit application. And there's this one type of content that's incredibly hard to manage. And in our legacy application, it takes us 2 weeks to actually get that content, one unit of that content, ready through the machinery and out the door. And we needed to get 15 of these out, right? So it literally took 300 man weeks effectively for our legacy systems. For our new system, which went live 3 weeks ago, it actually took us 2 weeks to get the entire 15 out the door. So that was like a huge effort and actually, or a huge win. And what was fascinating was that totally, when people started to see that, it actually changed. And these are not even the people who are charged with managing our expenses. It's the people who are actually on the other side developing this audit application. They were like, oh my God, we never thought like we would actually be able to go live on time, but you were able to deliver in such a small time period. So that was also just kind of key in the way of managing for us. But then the reuse of content, because we're a firm of accountants, we love stats. We said, when is a question not a question? And we figured out that because we have to translate into different languages and because our legacy systems don't support reuse of content, we had one question, James, I'm going to ask you to keep me honest. It was one question that basically wound up getting managed 728 times because it was being fed to multiple different places in multiple different languages. So it literally had to be maintained 728 times. And in our new application, which is built on SDL, it basically is one question that effectively is just managed 16 times. And that's just due to the language aspect, the translation aspect. So again, people started to get really excited about that.
So we're sharing these stories with you because we want you guys to go back to your organizations and think about how do we create a framework and how do we create some messaging that'll help get people excited. The other part that we wanted to talk about, I think the next slide's a Star Trek.
Oh.
Feedback loops? Is that?
No. We'll go past
Can't
this
just
one
Google the answer.
There is an element of the world that thinks that Google is the answer to everything.
Yes.
But I know it's not. So no offense to any Google people in the room.
I think I wanted to do our Star Trek slide. Go back one. Oh, we got rid of Star Trek because we didn't have the license rights for Star Trek. Sorry. Anyways, do you guys all remember
the
this
other thing when you're
line from
co-presenting with a professional accounting or a professional services firm is getting a presentation of photos through risk management takes forever. So
I mean, part of the challenge at Deloitte, part of the things that we talked about, and I think this is true for every organization, is that usually you have a group of people that consider themselves experts in user experience and design. And we're going to design the system for you, and you guys are going to love it. And so the experts go away in a corner, they go do whatever they're going to do, and then they show up, and then they can't understand why the entire organization hates the application. They hate the presentation, and it's because they're not invested, right? And I think one of the things that's really making a big difference, and I want Rob to sort of talk about your experience in Europe last week, but we've done a lot of work getting people involved, right? So now they have a vested stake in this. So they had a chance to share their perspective, and we get to create this kind of feedback loop. And Rob was sharing a story, which I'll let him finish, but just having that knowledge and then getting people feeling like, oh, wait a minute, I'm part of this now. So now I have some responsibility in this, and I feel like I had an opportunity to share, rather than having the tablets come down on high and here's your new system and I hope you like it. And then what you get when that happens is, well, why can't I just have it all on Google? And it just doesn't work. And so a lot of the success we're having is the way that we're socializing this and the way that we're getting people invested. But why don't you talk a little bit about your experience last week?
So I'm actually going to go back to March, if we will.
Fair enough.
Right? So historically in our firm, subject matter experts like myself, because I'm really an accounting geek at heart. I spent like 20 years of my career knowing 2 accounting standards and consulting with clients on that.
By the way, he's available for questions later about this standard.
If you want to know how not to consolidate or to consolidate a joint venture, just let me know. But historically, we were the ones who were charged with developing these tools, and we just assumed that everyone worked the way we worked, right? And so one of the big aha moments for us, like if I have to look back, what were the pivotal decisions we made over the last year, was to take a step back and say, let's not assume that everyone works the way we work. Let's actually go out and observe people working. And so I felt like I kind of worked for Procter & Gamble, maybe like watching people do laundry, but we literally traveled around the globe from March until May. We went to Hong Kong, we went to Tokyo, we went to London, we went throughout the United States. We did video conferences with people in South Africa, in Australia, in Germany, in Canada. And we did that because we knew that there are differences in the way people consume information depending on their culture. There are differences in the way people consume information depending on their content set, the domain knowledge that they're trying to consume. And there are differences in the way people consume information based on their seniority in the organization. So we literally, we went to Japan and we said, we want to talk to someone who's 2 years out of school. And then we want to talk to someone who's 7 years out of school. And then we want to talk to a partner, right? We want the entire span. And so we interviewed over 200 people. We literally put computers in front of them. We watched them work. We recorded them all. We went back. We analyzed all of that. And we realized that effectively we asked the 2% to design an application for the 98%, except for the 2% didn't know how the 98% worked, right? So by going out and meeting with 200 people, we started to observe these pain points that we didn't even know existed. And then what we did is we started to socialize it with the 2%, except for the 2% got very defensive because it didn't reflect the way that they worked, right? So we said, okay, stop. We're not going to continue the socialization with the 2%. What we're going to do is we're going to build a prototype of our proposed solution, and then we're going to go out and we're going to go back out to the masses, and we're actually going to put the prototype in front of them and ask them to work and see if it solves their problem. And so last week was the first week of us actually doing this, going in front of our users with the prototype. And so we spent Wednesday through Friday last week in Paris. We were in London yesterday. Today is Tuesday? Today's Wednesday. Yeah. We were in London Monday and Tuesday. I actually flew here from London yesterday. And we put the prototype in front of people. And it actually really was resonating. And we didn't get it perfect, right? And I'd say on one key aspect, we're 90% of the way there. On the other, we actually had the benefit of seeing how the 90% there worked to realize we're probably only 60% of the way there. So we're going to iterate again on it. But by putting it in front of people, we started to get facts. And what we did was because we're a firm of accountants, we like numbers. At the end of every interview, we asked people 3 questions. We said, on a scale of 1 to 10, thinking only about the prototype, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being this is awful, 10 being this is wonderful, what was your experience like? And we were averaging 7s and 8s with some 9s and 10s. And then we said, comparing this prototype to the current generation of our tools, with 5 being on par with the current generation, where is this? And we were mostly 7s and 8s with a couple of 9s and 10s. And then we said, what would you think your learning curve would be to adopt this application? 1 being it would take me forever and I would never be done. 10, this is like just Google. And we were more 8s and 9s, right? So now we're building this inventory of fact-based knowledge that we can actually go to our subject matter experts with, the people who are telling us this isn't the way people work, and say, oh no, we actually went out around the globe because we were in London and Paris. We're going to be in Toronto in 2 weeks. We're going to be in the United States after that. But no, we actually went in front of people, and this is how people are working. So now I have the data that I need to actually refute the voices of the people who think they know how the 98% work, but don't really, and do it in a fact-based way that's kind of not threatening to them.
Right. And I think this, again, what we're talking about is sort of building social capital inside the organization, but also creating these feedback loops. And again, Rob's able then to have these fact-based conversations. Nope, here are the scores, here are the results. I know you're an expert. And a lot of times people are so good at this one thing that they do, they already have all the shortcuts memorized. They know how to get to whatever it is that they're looking for. They've got it all figured out. And so if you let those people actually design the application, they leave everybody else that has to learn, who's on a 25-year learning curve, figure it out. And so I think, a lot of what's been successful about this is sort of getting people invested and getting people excited. And now Rob's got 250 people inside the organization that are champions who are excited about this. You can see this as an opportunity to contribute to the success of the company and say, I was a part of that and I made a difference and I gave some feedback. And I mean, these are sort of really important social capital to drive the business forward.
And that's actually the last question we asked everyone is, would you be willing to talk to us again? Because we're going to iterate on this. Would you be willing to talk to us again? And there was not one person who said no, and it wasn't just because they felt like they had to say yes. You could actually see the enthusiasm in their voices because they were like, I'm in on the ground floor here.
Yeah. You got to get people involved and get invested. What's our next slide, Rod? Also, is there a clock in here? I don't know. How are we doing on time?
I think we have 15 minutes.
Oh, good. We wanted to actually let you guys ask some questions. So where do you go from here? So we've got the prototype done. We're going to do another round of prototyping.
So luckily, the chief technology officer for our audit practice is someone that when he's asked when are we going to be done with our investment, no matter what program we're talking about, his response is today that we want to fold up our tent and go out of business. Right? So it's very helpful to have a chief technology officer that says that. For me, I'm constantly reminding people it's a journey. I always remind people this is a 5-year program that they signed up for. I'm actually candid about the fact. I tell them, look, I know that whatever we go out with first is going to be a vast improvement over where we are, but we're going to find things that are wrong. And we're going to need to actually iterate through it again. But we're talking about kind of things on the margins. We're not talking about, we won't be talking about wholesale things because of the investment we're making into really understanding what people are doing. So that's how I handle it. And at least right now, people seem to have patience. I also will say, one of our transformation leaders, he was talking to me a couple of months ago and he's like, look, this is your year. And I have the good fortune of he led massive projects on his own. This is your year just to get all the plumbing done, right? It's going to be not as frustrating, not as exciting to you because you're just getting the plumbing done. It's not visible to people, but this is your year to kind of lay all the groundwork.
Yeah. I just wanted to, and we'll take you next one. Implementing SDL is not a project. It is a program. And if you think it's a project, you're in bad shape to start out with. You've got to be honest. And I remember I sat with Rob. It was like, Rob, no matter how good our UX design is, the first time we do it, it's going to be wrong. It's just going to be wrong. You just have to be honest about it. And I think part of what doesn't go on in organizations is if you haven't built up the social capital and the currency and you haven't figured out a way to anchor the project and the sort of economics of the business and you don't have a constituency built, you can't have honest conversations about the fact that it's going to take 4 or 5 years or maybe longer. There's no software company that has one release and then they're done. I'm pretty certain there's a new version of SDL coming out next year, right? Everybody, there's just an iterative process, and it has to be that way. And so, it's not a project; it's a program, and I think that that's an important part of making sure that your project's successful. So,
what lessons have you learned around training and support and so forth through the process that you're going through?
So we're still early in our process. So right now, the key users of our system at this point, and it's a user group I haven't really spent a lot of time talking about, but they are a key constituency, is our content managers, right? The place where we are right now is really dealing with getting content. So our new audit application, all of our legacy applications pull from legacy content management systems. Our new audit application was built only having a pipeline to our platform, right? So our focus initially was really we needed to focus on delivering to that application. And so the folks who manage content in our firm have been active parts of this whole development process. And therefore, there wasn't as much training needed, if you will. We will, though, I mean, one of the things that we're very cognizant of is, and I'm going to go back out to the consuming side, right? So when we're traveling around the globe, I'll hear people say to me, well, we need to think about training for. And as soon as we actually need training for how to use a consumption tool, we failed, right? Because my previous experience tells me no one listens, no one watches training videos. Everyone closes the help overlays as soon as they present on the screen. No one looks at the FAQs, no one looks at the help documents, and then everyone complains about the system and the fact that they don't know how to use it. And there is, and that's the reason why our focus has been on simplicity. And so if I do a point of comparison, our legacy system, you open it up, and the consumption system, research portal, there are boxes everywhere. There's a story behind every box. There's a story behind every feature. The prototype that we've put in front of people literally is, because if we're in London, it was a picture of London Tower Bridge. If we were in Paris, it was a picture of the Eiffel Tower. And it has one question that says, are you here to research an accounting issue or an auditing issue? Right? And that starts your journey. And what was amazing is that the people that we would ask, what is your reaction to that front page? They were like, oh my God, this is wonderful. I actually know what to do. So we're really focusing on making it as simple as we can for the user. The other thing I wanted to hit on, because I don't think we've hit on this, but this is a huge part of our project, is I'm talking entirely about the consumption side, but, and James knows this, and he and I have talked about this a lot. Within our firm, we have 4 different major production groups around the globe that are producing content. And that's because we have 2 legacy content management systems that have totally separate processes, right? And I have a group of accountants sitting above saying, why do we have 4 production groups? We could combine that into one, but they don't understand that we can't because we have totally different processes and everything else. And so a large part of this is also making sure that as we're steering the ship towards getting one set of common processes and managing this both from the production side as well as from the consumption side to really steer towards one production group down the road. So it's interesting. We had, on the reusable content, we're a regulated profession, right? So we have a lot of content that we're not allowed to change. We take the content in from the regulator, we have to keep it as it is. Then we develop all of our interpretations around it. We actually had many philosophical discussions early in our project around reuse of content, with some people thinking that we should be able to get to 95% reuse of content, which we would never get to, and other people thinking we could never reuse content. But the reality is that we will have a policy, and then we'll have excerpts from that policy in different guides that we ultimately issue to the field. And so it's ultimately figuring out what level of reuse can you have there. The perfect example I would give, legacy content management system to new content management system, we come up with, we call it a global audit manual. We have one global audit manual, and then all of our locations around the globe supplement for the requirements specific to their regulatory regime, right? So France may have a specific requirement that the UK doesn't have. Currently, because of the limitations of our content management system, legacy, we have 13 different versions of that manual out there. We have the global, and then we have the 12 different versions around the globe. And so when a standard setter makes one change, we have to make the change 13 times. Obviously, the world that we're going to get to is the reuse of content in the way the standard setter makes the change. If it's a change that impacts the common manual across the globe, we make the change once. And then you're really just maintaining the 90% once and the 10% that's unique to each firm separately. So we don't have hard and fast. We're not looking at this like we got to get to 95% reuse of content. But we've already kind of seen, just going my example of 728 units of content to 16, where just in its natural course, there'll be ample opportunity to reuse, which then drives quality up too, right? Because you eliminate the manual risk. So the key thing for me is to getting to a common set of processes. without dragging you into all the legal and risk management, there's a philosophical question as to whether we ultimately want to have one content management team, or do we want to have multiple content management teams based on jurisdiction? But what I want to put in place, and a lot of that will be discussions with risk management and OGC to kind of figure out things around liabilities and where do liabilities sit. It gets into a whole separate world. What I ultimately want to make sure is that we have in place a common set of processes across those four, so that when the time is right, we can ultimately combine them down. I don't think, to be honest, this is my model, just my own personal view, I don't think we're ever going to get to the point of having one group. And the reason why I say that is if there's something really urgent going on in France, they shouldn't have to wait until the people in the US arrive to get something urgently out the door, right? But we should be able to have one common group that can deal with all the predictable stuff that happens on a quarterly basis, and then ultimately have some level of flexibility around the globe for each of our offices to get the stuff out that's related to them in kind of a quick and efficient manner.
I think one of the best things about, I say this all the time, one of the best things about implementing SDL is you don't actually have to change the way you do business to implement the software. You just need to document how you do business well. And so unlike, say, an SAP implementation where you basically are reorganizing the way the accounting department works, you have a lot of flexibility, but then it gives you the opportunity to have the kind of conversations that Rob is talking about, which is, let's be philosophical about this. Let's look where we need to actually efficiency, where we need time to market, where we need to move quickly, but where are there places where we can consolidate decision making and we can look for opportunities for content reuse. And I also wanted to make the comment earlier because you asked about finding reusable content. You don't find it all at once. It takes time. That's also why this is a program, not a project. So even if you do, I don't know how many pages of content you have, but if you have a couple 100,000 pages, or in your case, a few million pages of content, it's going to take a while. But once you set up the right systems and processes, you start to discover, like, oh wait, this piece of content's being used frequently, and okay, we can go ahead and start consolidating. And that's also part of one of the challenges when people think about it like a project. They want it's like they want all the presents opened up on Christmas Day at the same time all at once. Like, it just doesn't work that way. It takes time to sort of let the technology unfold and to look for and find those efficiencies.
And I realize we're at time, so
Yeah,
I'll leave this as my closing comment, but I am happy to stay behind if anyone has questions. When I ultimately talk to people, what I constantly remind them is, look, we have to build the system for the for the content that exists today, recognizing, because one of the best things that Brad told me when we first met a year ago was, Rob, I don't know how to break this to you, but really you're the CEO of a publishing business. That is your job, right? And so we have to basically build the technology and the platform for the content that exists today while simultaneously making it flexible enough to accommodate the content that will be tomorrow, and giving our subject matter experts who own the content the time to deal with that transition. And that kind of eases a lot of the anxiety in the system, because a lot of people are like, oh my God, when do I have to have this done by, or am I going to hold up the system going live? So I think we are at time, but I am happy to stand behind if people have any questions.